Wow, this is really a crowd. We're not used to so many people in Norway, you know. This is a small country. I like to come with a warning first. I will use, or we will use on this stage, the word IGLC community several times today. And this has nothing to do with religion or something like that. Rather, community here is the expression used to explain how we are all in this room, brought together by a common interest to understand and to improve the construction industry. That, in fact, we have an obligation to do so, being here. So this is important to have in mind. I've been to several IGLC conferences, and on the first one I attended, I was like a baby lost in the woods. I mean, I'm a sociologist, I have to admit. And IGLC is truly a world of engineers, I have to say. And luckily, one of the people I approached on this conference was one of the first people, was Sven Bertelsen sitting there. And I asked him, how do I get to know people here? And he said, well, you just have a drink, sit down and talk. And that's what I did. And this is what we're going to do right now. You will now have the pleasure to be watching a typical conversation in the IGLC atmosphere, and this time between the true pioneers of lean construction. So, could you all come to the stage? Sven, Lauri, Luis, and Glenn, and also Carlos. You can stay here, but I will introduce you all shortly. When I say your name, guys, could you raise your hand? Sven Bertelsen from Denmark. Yes, give him a hand. He's probably the single most important person when it comes to the introduction of lean construction in both Denmark, Sweden, and Norway, I would say. Please have that in mind. Luis Alarcón. He's been a key member of the IGLC community all the way since the beginning. He's a productive person who has written numerous papers to these conferences and who also edited, in fact, the first IGLC proceedings ever to be published. Glenn Ballard. That's the man sitting here. He's the man behind Last Planner, a production planning and control system, which you will hear a lot about during this day. And not least, he's also the inventor of integrated project delivery, which some of you will learn more about in tomorrow's workshop. Lauri Koskela. He's the mastermind behind the theory of production and its application to construction. Say no more. He is a real guru in this setting. Carlos Formoso. A man who has convinced me and all other members of the IGLC community with his impressive insight into the field of lean construction in both the practical and scientific sense of the term. So, floor is yours. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me to be the chair of this panel. It's a great pleasure for me for different reasons. First, well, this panel opens a week full of activities related to lean construction. We have the industry day, we have the workshop, the workshops tomorrow, we have the conference, and then the summer school. So I guess I'll be very tired at the end of this week with so many activities. it's nice that the organizers included this panel, which is a little bit about the history of IGLC. I think it's important for all of you to learn a little bit about the history, because you can actually understand how our community works. And finally, it's a great pleasure for me to be chairing this panel, because I've known all these people for a long time. So I've been a member of IGLC for nearly 20 years. So we met every year in a different part of the world. So it's something very nice about this community. So the panel, we had a discussion yesterday, and we defined 3 guiding questions to be discussed in the panel. The first one is about the origin of lean construction. The second one, the meaning of lean construction. And the third one about the IGLC community, how it works. So I'm going to make an introduction about each one of these questions, and then we have around 10 minutes for each of them. So we have 4 people, on average 2.5 minutes for each, right? And so the first question is, how did you get involved in lean construction? What was it that encouraged you to get involved in this approach? Who inspired you? And it's worth mentioning that we have 4 people. 2 of them, Glenn and Sven, started getting involved in this theme as practitioners, and Lauri and Luis Fernando started as academics. So it's nice to have these 2 points of views. So, anybody would like to start?
I can start.
Okay.
As Carlos mentioned, I came to lean and to lean construction from an industrial background, industrial construction actually. So power plants, paper mills, chemical plants, refineries, that kind of thing. And I had begun working out my thinking about this last planner system that you'll hear about later. And I met Lauri Koskela when he came to Stanford as a visiting scholar, and I think it was 1991. And I was fascinated with the possibility that we could actually understand construction and do it better. And we conspired together and put together a very small conference in Helsinki, in Espoo actually, in 1993. And I think we at that time adopted the term lean construction. So.
In my case, okay. I was a student at Berkeley by that time, doing my PhD, and we became friends with Glenn. We used to have lunch together every week to talk about construction. Maybe you were thinking about the future Lean Construction Institute by that time. Thinking about how to improve the industry, how to improve productivity. I had a background in my country of developing a productivity research program for the industry, working with the Chilean Chamber of Construction. So I was very motivated with these topics. I had done research. I had seen how poor performance we had regarding waste and regarding cycle times in our industry. And I learned a lot from my class from Glenn by that time. I also met Greg Howell during this time. So we were involved in a conversation, and I think we have some sympathy about what should be the future.
Yeah, I started quite differently from the other three persons here in the panel, because we in Denmark in around 1990 came to think about whether the supply of building materials in the construction industry was really undertaken the best way. And we did that in cooperation, I come from a consulting engineering company called NIRAS, and we did that investigation in cooperation with two major players in supplying of building materials. I think Brødrene Dahl is also available here in Norway, and the other one was a timber supplier, dry materials, I could say, that was called those days Superbyg. And together we sat down and say, could we redefine the role of the building material supplier as a more key player in the logistics? And we made an experiment, and we came quite early to recognize that in establishing a just-in-time delivery would have a lot of benefits, but also it would be very difficult to undertake because of the chaotic nature of the construction process. And that word chaotic was first time I sort of came to use that, and it has played a major role in my future work with lean construction, because we are talking about a chaotic process, and we have to understand that in order to improve the flow. Now, we made some experiments that was great success, but without having a proper theory, we couldn't really understand why it was such a success and why it wasn't so successful in following projects. We didn't really appreciate what we had in hand. And then in 1999, I came across lean construction and participated in the conference in Berkeley. And that year I met, for the very first person, Glenn, who gave me, as a foreigner, a very warm welcome. And I felt immediately on the first morning I was being part of the family. And then later on, I met my later very good friend and colleague, Lauri, who provided the theory. And these two contributions, Glenn's introduction of flow, understanding, and Lars Planner as a control method for the flow, and Lauri's transformation flow value theory, is really the basis for my implementation of lean construction in Denmark, and to a great extent for the Danish industry's understanding of lean construction. I have a poster on my use of theory somewhere, and you're welcome to ask me more about that later on.
So I worked at the end of the 80s at VTT, and I worked with what was called high technology in construction robotics, expert systems, even some what was called product modeling issues and so on. And so in robotics we collaborated with electronics guys from Oulu at VTT, and we produced actually some working robots. But there was a kind of turning point in one innocent question by an electronics colleague. He asked whether we have been thinking in construction to simplify and streamline processes before we start automating them, as obviously they had been doing in electronics already. And that problem and question started to nag me, and luckily my employer sent me to Stanford for 1 year to study this, what was called new production philosophy, which was just the thinking about simplifying and streamlining processes. And also I wanted to do a PhD there. Yeah. And after starting at Stanford in September or so, in '91, I wanted to have a big idea, like any PhD student who are lost in the first year, do not know what is kind of the big idea and what they should be doing. Anyway, the word process seemed important. But then I realized that people are using that word in two different ways. There are people who think that a process is momentary. There is just input, there is output, and the transformation occurs in one moment, actually moment without any time extension. And then there were other people who thought that the process is a flow process, so there is time flowing, and we are looking what happens in time. And then this distinction seemed useful for understanding this new production philosophy from Toyota, and also the old mainstream philosophy, and I guess that was the key finding which raised interest with Glenn and others. And actually my whole academic career has been centered around these kind of conceptual issues, and here we are.
I'll get this.
Okay, thank you. Well, the second question is what lean construction is about. We know that there are many different definitions about lean construction, and I wonder if you could give a brief one that expresses the essence of lean construction in your opinion. I know this is very challenging, so we have 2.5 minutes to talk about that.
Well, I'll go first, but I'm not going to. I think that the question, the reason we have so many answers to the question, what is lean construction, is that it depends on who's asking and why. Right? There's not one answer. Right? There are many different reasons for asking and many different accounts that are useful. Right? But I imagine that most of the people in this audience are interested in how it's different from ordinary practice. Right? And then perhaps how it's better. Why should I do it? Right? And this, of course, is not, I have about 2 minutes, and I'm not going to be able to persuade you, but I can share some thoughts. One, here are some differences. Doers plan. The people that do the work plan the work. When something goes wrong, we focus on process before person. We avoid sub-optimizing by limiting by having a different financial interest for each party in the project. Right? So we want to optimize the whole. And we managers in the lean system teach and coach. So those seem to me to be critical differences. There are many more, of course. And then just to say some benefits, clients get more value for their money. Designers and builders make more money, more profit. And people want to come to work. Oh, that's me.
Okay.
I'm going to say maybe what, for me, lean construction is not. I mean, what is not lean construction is not just tools or methods. There is also, you need to work together with the management philosophy that will orientate your work. You need the tools, of course, but not by themselves. And you also need people that you give them a role, a different role, empowerment. You need people very competent, motivated, that wants to collaborate, wants to work as teams, not just individuals. So you need those three things: the management philosophy that orientates your actions, and I think that's very important, because if you don't have that, you're driving in a blind. That will give you the authority to make changes, to choose the tools, to choose the people, to train the people. So you need the three things: management, philosophy, tools and methods, and people. I think that's the key.
Okay, let me answer in another way, because I once got the answer from one of my students, and she said, this can be expressed in what we call 7 sentences. The first one, the single least important word is I. The single most important word is you. The 2 most important words are thank you. The 3, I can't remember all of them, but excuse me. I think the 4 most important word is you did a good job. The 5 most important words are I made a mistake, and what was the 7? Okay, but ask me, I have them somewhere. But I just came to think about it. This is unprepared. But I think really that expressed the whole idea behind lean construction in very simple, 7 simple sentences. So excuse me for improvising.
So I guess it falls to me to emphasize the importance of waste, which is a difficult concept. So it is a shorthand, but lean is about elimination of waste. What are we not doing if we are eliminating waste? So we are not optimizing. Always there is a gap between the ideal, between the optimum and the real situation, and most often it's more important to reduce that gap than to create an even better optimum. And actually one can go back into the history of philosophy with this. The guy who was interested in optima was Plato. He thought that there's an ideal world which is kind of the real world and the most important, and actually any optimum is in the ideal world of Plato. Aristotle wanted to go to empirical world to have verification and test, and indeed waste turns out only when we try out our ideas and see what happens.
Okay, thank you. So let's go to the third question. It seems that the key reason for the success of lean construction has been the formation of the IGLC community. It's worth mentioning that Luis, Fernando, Lauri, and Glenn were at the very first meeting in 1992 in Finland, so this is the 22nd, so you've been there since the beginning. So I wonder if you could talk a little bit about how this community works and what makes it different from other existing networks in construction management, in lean in general, and what's the contribution of this community towards the spreading of lean construction ideas in different countries?
Well, I'm reminded of Groucho Marx, who famously said that he didn't want to be a member of any club that would have him as a member. Right? And I think what Groucho was doing was, in his clever way, making fun of clubs who claim exclusivity as a grace, as a virtue, right? And I think Groucho would be pleased with our club, because the only requirement for membership is that you think you're a member. Yeah? You don't have to pay dues. You don't have to sign anything. You don't have to put your hand on any kind of a Bible, right? But you do have to join the conversation and be interested in figuring out how to make our industry better, right? And my membership in this club has been enormously valuable to me, so.
Well, I think there is another virtue of this group. I think this is not just an academic community, it's also an academic and industry community. We have close relationship with the industry. We have been, most of our research is working with companies, producing impact, showing results. In my case, I have been very fortunate to have the institutional support from, in my case, the Chilean Chamber of Construction. But I think in all the cases, in different countries, the members of these communities have been able to work very closely with the industry, and that's something that makes us bigger. We have a community of academics and practitioners, and that's a very good thing to have in these days. It's not just a group of academics working by themselves, it's working with the society also.
Yeah, I have often compared this group with a family. And we have an annual family reunion where all cousins and brothers and sisters, whoever, meets and have a fun time together over for 3, 4, 5 days. And we have all a great benefit when we go back, and we have friendships which last for not only this year, but next year and so on. I have very many good personal friends I have gotten during this, my 10 years or more, 15 years it may be, participation in this group. And that is a key issue to me. And I can always, when a problem turns up, ask a question by an email, and we can organize a Skype meeting, we talk about it, and I learn a lot. And that is a key issue to me. And then, as was it Glenn who mentioned it, this is not an association or something formal. We have no bylaw, as Greg Hovel usually says. We have no permanent organization. We sort of organize ourselves nearly from conference to conference and discuss who's taking over next year, and then it's decided, period. And I think that's really an inspirational way of working.
So when I look at established organizations in construction, international organizations, so I start to think that this is, or domestic organizations too, this is a structure seeking for contents. Here, I think IGLC is contents seeking structure. And I think the balance is right as long as the contents is more important, more structured than the organization. However, we have yielded a bit, and actually we have bylaws. There's a president, Ken. Is Ken here? So anyway, he will be later this year. So we have a minimal organization, but nothing more.
Yeah, it was interesting to learn that Luis Fernando got involved in lean construction over lunch, having lunch with Glenn. And I had a similar experience. I started participating in IGLC in 1996, and I started studying the Las Planas system. And it was, at the beginning, it was really difficult to understand. And then I went to Berkeley, and I remember that I went for a sabbatical, and we had lunch every Monday. Had lunch together. I had me, Glenn, Iris, and then I finally understood the Las Planas system. So I connect the Las Planas with Japanese, because we used to go to a Japanese restaurant. So I make a strong connection between Las Planas and Japanese food. Yeah. And I think, well, this is of course simple story, but I think it's very representative of the kind of relationship that we have. We have strong academic connections, we have connections, strong connections between academics, industry, and we have also, we've made many friends in this community, and it's always a pleasure to come every year, meet you all again. All right, that's it. Thank you very much. Thank you.